Are you ready? Are you ready? Because today is the day when you start figuring out how to create a home you love. Right now, with what you already have and in the home you are currently living in. I'm Zandra, your host of the Style Matters podcast, brought to you by Little Yellow Couch. And listen, I truly believe that you shouldn't put off living inside something beautiful and energizing and nurturing for some kind of imaginary, perfect life that is somewhere in the future. You need those things right now. So for this show, we talk about how to create a home that feels meaningful and works beautifully. If you're listening because you're overwhelmed by conflicting advice and too many choices, or you're listening because you've never felt very creative when it comes to decor, or maybe you're here because you're just as obsessed with design as I am and you can't wait to dig into creating that beautiful home, welcome. This community of listeners is your people. You found us, and I am so glad you're here. Today, I'm talking with Andrew Suvalsky. I told him he was my new favorite designer, and I don't say that lightly. His work is right up my aesthetic alley. He leans toward maximalism, but he does know when to pull back. And he's what I call a master of the mix, by which I mean he can take random, seemingly disconnected things and pull them together in a way that's completely unexpected, but also beautifully in communication with each other. I'm talking colors, patterns, eras, styles, materials, and it doesn't look like a big mess or a high-end thrift store gone crazy. If you want to learn how to do this in your own home, I want you to study Andrew's work. Really look at each room and think about why his compositions work. And you can hop on over to this week's episode's show notes page on our website at littleyellowcouch.com to start looking at his photos. Here's Andrew. Andrew Suvalsky, welcome to the Style Matters podcast. We were talking right before we started, and I was telling you, I think you're my new favorite designer. I am so excited to share what you're doing. It is incredibly creative, and I really like talking with people who put things together in unexpected ways. And you are clearly the master at that. So welcome to the show.
Well, first of all, two thank yous. Thank you for having me and hosting me. And I'm very excited to be here and talk about lots of fun things. And thank you for such warm, really very complimentary things about my work and even some of the specifics you said. I'm glad that that's how you see it and that it resonates for you because, the creative process is what makes what I do fun and not just work. It's nice. It's nice to make something pretty. It's nice to be appreciated, but it sounds like you really enjoy the details the way I do. So that's going to be exciting to talk about.
Oh, it's all about the details. And I want to know, how did you first get clued into that? I mean, were you a kid? Was it later? When did you become obsessed? Because I think you probably are obsessed with design and what it can do for us.
Well, yeah, I'm like spot on the way you pose the question. I mean, first of all, I guess my obsession really did start at a very young age before I was aware of anything to do with design as a thing. Mm-hmm. I had proclivities. I had first of all, I always like to let people know that I'm a trained architect first. Oh. And the reason that matters isn't because I wanted to say, this versus that. It's just, I think that's where I started. I used to love to build. Like the earliest ages I can remember, I gravitated towards Lincoln Logs, erector sets, and Legos. That was it. And before that, and this is a real story. I like one of my very oldest memories. I remember sitting outside, and there used to be these wood chips. They were like decorative wood chips around the tree. I'd take those little wood chips and I'd start building little, I think, subdivisions or something. I don't know.
Subdivisions.
I don't know what the subdivision was, but I definitely knew what little buildings were, and I would organize them. I had this need to build and then I progressed once I got pencil to paper. I used to love house plans. Like I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with house plans. I used to go. I'm old enough to say that I would go to the library, and I would go to these magazines, vintage house plans for sale. So I used to try to imitate house plans, and I loved to house hunt when I was a kid. Like I'd make my parents take me up and down the streets with the big fancy houses, the old mansions. So the desire and the interest was there kind of just from the beginning. So I went to
Mm-hmm.
architecture school. If I went into architecture school for my graduate, I had no idea interior design per se as a profession.
Right.
Architecture, I understood it was like
Yeah.
that's what like
Somebody has to
people did.
design the building.
I really, really wanted to move to New York very badly. And
Okay.
I was like hungry, really hungry. By then I'd already kind of decided I didn't want to be an architect, at least in a traditional sense.
Yeah.
I meant all that. And I remember, by the way, hearing that architects start out of school then started at the lowest pay level of all the people that I was graduating from
Right.
college. So I'm like, I'm not doing that. So
Right.
I didn't have a good plan B. I just knew I wanted to get to New York. I knew I wanted to find my way in a more creative capacity. And then that's where divine intervention stepped in. I ended up getting a job with one of the top interior designers of then and still to this day, I believe he still is. And his name is Benjamin Noriega Ortiz.
Yes.
I had a job with him as a personal assistant. He offered me a position, and I didn't know what a personal assistant was,
Right.
by the way. But I said, I really didn't.
Right. Right.
But I said I'll take the job. He didn't hire me as a designer because I was not qualified, so to speak. But he looked at my portfolio. He's like, "Oh, you have a nice out of college portfolio, but you have no work experience leading up to the job that he was looking to fulfill." But we hit it off, and he offered me this position as his personal assistant, and I got there, and I was just, I got to tell you, I was like within moments, I felt like really at home.
Wow.
And it was like he both had a lot of things aligned. I mean, he was great for me personality wise. He understood. He was nice. He was nurturing. Started giving me responsibilities beyond the personal assistant position, and I stepped into it. And I guess I'd say I'll stop myself there and say the rest is history. So
Well,
yeah,
he
it worked out
sounds
well.
amazing. Yes, and also I think that I understand what you mean by it was a fluke or divine intervention, but the fact that you were willing to just put yourself in a position where you know you knew you wanted to do something creative, so you're just kind of putting yourself in a position where at least you could be around creativity, and I think that that's something that young people don't necessarily understand. They're so literal thinking like I've got to do XYZ because I went to school for ABC, and there's they think it's just such a straight line to connect those dots, and for a lot of us it's more like a crazy squiggly line to get to our path.
Definitely, I agree with
yeah,
that. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I was scrappy, and I
yeah.
think I still am. And so, to whomever is on that path or any path, just be curious, be hungry, and be willing to say yes a lot more than no. Is what I would say.
Oh, those are I got to write those down. I'm going to pass them right along to my son.
Yes, I agree.
There's so much I want to talk with you about. And I was very disciplined in narrowing down my questions to basically, I want to kind of look into 3 different projects you've done. But honestly, I cannot wait for people to see photos on our show notes page from your work. But we have a limited amount of time. So
Okay,
I've been disciplined, but before we even get into those three projects, I'm wondering if just sort of broad strokes, if you could share your thought process. How do you mix things together? Like I said at the very beginning, that is your, that is your sweet spot. Do you always start with a color palette? Do you always start with a piece of art or a scene from a movie? How do you do it?
I'll tell you what I start with,
Okay.
how I get from one stage to the next. The very first thing I want to do is draw the plan. I just draw the plan. I want to organize the space. That's what's really happens for me is I want to organize the space, figure out all the places that you can add what you need and add what's better to make the space better. I'm going to reference Benjamin again because something that always resonated with me. He said, good decorating can hide a lot of bad architecture. I always think, okay, you get this space. How do I get it to the highest architectural level without rebuilding the space completely? Sometimes we do rebuild the space, but there's something about the space that you're still stuck with. If it's an apartment, we're stuck with the exterior walls.
Right.
You're stuck with plumbing stacks, and toilet locations that you probably can't move because it's in a high rise. So
Right.
those I can't change, but how much can I change? So, and then the more limited that the changing of the physical is, like if I'm not going to really move walls even, then I can still do a lot with decorating to make the space flow better, feel taller, feel wider, feel brighter. There's a lot I can do there. So I kind of start with that. I'm already thinking about the parties that are going to happen there and where people are going to be conversing, where they're going to be, hanging out, depending on the size of the room. Could there be a few different places or moments to hang out in a room and legitimately have a different experience? So the furniture layout really gives me that opportunity. So that's where I'd say I start, which says nothing about the look or the style or the color yet. It does. That comes next.
But the furniture arrangement, it plays such a huge role in how we experience a space, how we flow through it, how we interact with one another, I think. And
Definitely.
As you're talking, one room of yours comes to mind, and it's the one in Bronxville, and it's a living room that is rather large. And there's a fireplace that sort of demands you think of it as a focal point. And then there's this huge opening, and there's at least one window, and then there's a small opening. Okay. And I think people without your training would struggle with, how do I set this up? And they might try to force it to be one sitting area, which would be huge. And it wouldn't be comfortable. You've got 3 distinct areas in that one room. And I think that's what you're referring to. You probably had to figure that out first. Yeah.
I did. So to me, every design challenge, I mean, like sometimes you get a living room and it's like, wait a minute, there are no walls. I mean, there's walls, but the walls are all taken up with a window or a fireplace or an opening.
Yes.
To tell you the truth, my own living room is a little bit like that. And we'll get to that later. But so the more challenging, the more the more I have to struggle with a good layout, the more I know that there's something there. Just got to dig deeper. There is an answer. There is a solution. So like in that case, in that living room, it is pretty large. There's windows on both ends. The fireplace is not centered directly in the middle of the room. It's slightly off center. So, the fireplace always presents a major focal point, but it's not the only focal point. When you're in a room, if you focus on the fireplace, that's great. But that doesn't mean that's the only thing the room has to offer you. And also the bigger the room means more people potentially can fit there, but you're not going to put 12 people in a round table discussion. People like to have fairly intimate moments, maybe up to 4, rarely more, in terms of how they are conversing, and how they're sitting. And so I think of it in terms of like, where can there be those moments? Can there be some transitional spacing? So where maybe like in this living room, I think you probably saw there's a tete-a-tete sofa.
Love it. Yes.
And what's kind of cool about that is it's actually divides the room literally in half. So it's to the right of the fireplace, but it's really, I don't know if mathematically it's exactly the center, but more or less it kind of dissects the room. But because it's a tete-a-tete, it presents to either direction. It's not discrete. In other words, there's not 3 separate seating areas. There's 3 seating areas that have a little movement or a flow between them. And that is the fun part, to start to create that. Because then I start to feel that potential flow and movement. And then that starts giving way to like the energy of the room and other fun things you're going to want to do, color or otherwise, that makes sense of that interplay.
And then what happens? So you kind of organize the space in your mind, and then how do you take off from there? Or is that when it starts to get different for every project?
I'd say I take cues and clues from my clients to start. So first thing is like, well, they bought this house. What do they like about the house? What don't they like about the house? In this case, for the husband, more so for the wife, the wife being that she didn't like the darkness, the more heavy, that old English vibe. She appreciated it, but she didn't want it to feel like an old English home.
Right.
I would say her husband was more of a purist. He's like, he bought this house. He wanted to elevate its natural bones. He wanted to give respect to its vintage and all that stuff. I think.
Right.
So that's where I start to think about, certainly the direct questions, what are your favorite colors? What are the colors you don't like? People can usually answer those pretty quickly, and then I'll ask some questions around that. But after that, I start to ask less questions, and I start to trust my instinct as far as what I'm going to just kind of bring into the mix. I'm all for the big reveal. I don't say, what do you think about this fabric for some supposed sofa? I'll say, what do you think of this room with all these fabrics, with these different furniture pieces, which I'll illustrate their look, whether it be through images or drawings or both. And I give them the full storyboard of the room,
Yeah.
because everybody comes initially with suggestions and they want to be helpful, but they also don't want to, they don't want to stop me from being creative and come up with something better than they could, because then what's the point of me?
Right.
So, so it's, I kind of go in there and I'll take some bold, I'm comfortable being bold, not just in the look, but really like pushing people to look at something that I know that they probably never looked at before. If I think is appropriate to the design, something that's more dramatic or larger scaled, or just something that you're certainly not going to go see in every store.
Can you, I just want to pick that apart a little bit. How would you describe that presentation to them? What are they seeing?
So they're seeing, this is always you're asked like what steps repeat,
yeah,
versus maybe where they diverge. It's always the same. And I do this because I need it. I need to like kind of examine the design from a few different angles to feel like I got it. Like I'm ready to go. I've already vetted a lot of the details. So my storyboards are not just a story. They're really, maybe storyboard is the right word, to tell you the truth. It's more, this is the design as presented with a scaled furniture plan, elevations that analyze how the furniture presents. I'm already thinking about scale of artwork, and I present all this. So I want to see where the height of the lamp measures up to the height of the sofa relative to, is it a single large piece over the sofa, or is it going to be a series of prints? Yeah. All of that is illustrated so that it's a real map. It's a real blueprint of what I want to do.
Sure.
I really want it to be about the creative, about getting people excited that this is like, there's magic happening. There's a special sauce that if they have hired me, that they're going to get. Nothing is ever by rote.
Right.
Every design is different. And that's absolutely the fun part for me, is to see that it's limitless,
Well, let's dive into some specifics here, because the way I think of this conversation, the rest of the conversation, is being almost like a masterclass. How did you do that? Why does this work? And I'm hoping you can kind of break that down for us. First up is a penthouse near Lincoln Center, Midtown Manhattan.
Yep.
And I want to talk about the den with this incredible wallpaper. And a side note here, with all of your spaces, one of the things that comes to mind is that if you looked at the elements separately, I think for some people, it could be hard to imagine them working in any setting, because some of them are kind of out there. And some, you might not even like them at all individually, right? But it's the way you've combined them that I think makes them look outstanding. So this is a great example of that. In this photograph, I'm looking at a den. It's got really strong graphic lines between the wallpaper and the carpet. You've got for color, brown, navy, acid yellow. Materials, it's a small space, and yet you've got leather, velvet, glass, green marble, wood, brass, probably something I'm missing. And somehow it doesn't look like a crazy, out of control carnival. It really works to the point where it actually looks like the kind of space I could kick my shoes off in. So even though it's got all these formal elements, velvet and that wallpaper and the marble top, it looks like I can totally put my feet up on those little coffee tables. So how does that work?
You know what? I'm just not scared to throw a lot of stuff into the kitchen sink
okay.
So the question is, how to make it work? I think you have to know instinctively how things will scale together. So if I'm going to do, let's say, the wallpaper, the rug reiterates the wallpaper on a basic level, but it doesn't imitate it. So I didn't reproduce the print of the wallpaper on the rug, but they both, as you said, they have sort of a geometric repeating graphic form. They're obviously different materials, but the color scheme is largely aligned. So if you have certain things that are repetitive to each other, there's room to then diverge. So in this case, you got the colors are similar, the geometrics are similar, the repetitive pattern is similar.
Yeah.
And then I let it kind of go from there. So those kind of balance each other. So by adding it's almost like a little counterintuitive, but like by adding in two versions of one element is better than just having one.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a little validation going on there. And because we're also, now the other part of that is I chose to put them on the largest fields of the room, right? The walls and the
Right.
floor, the walls and the floor.
They're not on little pillows. Yeah. We're talking, you're immersed in it.
You're immersed. So that's the skin. So right away in a small room, you've got something with a little like depth that then will hold the rest of the room. So the leather and the blue, I want, again, if you go back to the zebra wood cabinetry, it gives you a little, based on the color of it, which is not in the picture, it gives rise to why I chose a kind of a caramely leather. I'm actually gonna look at my own pictures.
Well, I think the brown part is velvet, and then the leather is the navy.
I got it backwards. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at the pictures. Right. So, like, you got wood. Well, you can see even in the round tables. That's close enough. Like,
right.
That really plush mohair is reminiscent of wood. That's where that comes from. It's that tone that's already there. The blue is just kind of obvious because there's a lot of blue tones in the wallpaper, and then there's certain things that generally resonate I wanted the room to feel luxe and very plush and very clubby and comfortable. So I went for fabrics and materials that have in a traditional sense fulfill those. The leather does that.
The clubby feel,
thick, the clubby feel. They're very thick mohair velvet, which is there's mohair and there's mohair. This
is mohair.
This is the real stuff, and boy, does it feel like it. And you can even see the sheen. It brings in it reflects light in a special way. So then you got it's interacting with the light, and then you commented on the chartreuse or the acid yellow pillows. So
the vase too.
The vase too, right? So those accent colors. That's a good example of something that I like to employ in a lot of my designs, which is it's like an outlier. That I know is going to be it's that special something that's going to take the room from really pretty to really special. Yes. And there's a mathematical balance to it that I can't write for you the formula, but I do trust that when you get the elements of scale, texture, color, well balanced, there's a lot of room there. They have many notes. I just used two metaphors, I guess. There's room for many. I love music, by the way. I love music, and that's a big part of my life. So one thing I tell you, music, and I see no difference in design, is like you can have a melody that has, 8 notes, and that can be a beautiful melody that everybody can sing or hear or remember. Give it to a jazz artist.
Yeah,
they're going to find like 32 other notes in and around it, but but you'll still recognize the melody.
Right. I love that metaphor.
It's a real, and so I'm like, let's go for the 32 notes because that's more fun. That's at least my style. I'm not saying I don't respect somebody who can work in 3 notes and create amazing magic. I appreciate minimalism. I'm not over the top, but I'm not a minimalist by my nature. I like something just somewhere between, I think you got to know also when to stop.
Right.
When you've over designed something, I like to think we don't go there. But I think I kind of want to take you right, push that envelope a little bit so that there are some magic and some exciting things happening that would not be expected. And that's I think fun. That gives a little, that's more of the icing on the cake that even if the cake is delicious, I still want that little extra.
Exactly. Something. It's like adding, you're cooking and it's just for yourself. And so I don't know, it's something like tortillas with, mashed beans and something, whatever. But if you take the time to add the chopped cilantro to the top, just at the end as a garnish, it puts the dish over the top. It's fine without the cilantro. It'll still taste great. The cilantro doesn't, change the flavor makeup, but it's that detail that makes you go, oh, this was a special meal, even though it's only a Tuesday night. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't have to be like a wild stretch. It's just like, I think it might be the difference, like you said, cilantro, no cilantro. So I go for the cilantro.
Right.
I go for the salami. And
Exactly.
maybe a few other, and the nuts and a few other delectables.
Right. Maybe a little squeeze of lime as well. Just,
Yeah, absolutely.
for brightness.
Right. We got to keep it bright and energetic. Like the last thing is like, I like there to be energy in my room, even though
Yeah.
I want them to feel centered and comfortable.
Yep.
So, that's also, I'm like, well, if I kind of know instinctively if I feel a room is like not done.
All right. So let's go back to that Gothic revival home that I mentioned earlier. I want to start just by asking you about the foyer. The walls are wrapped in this heavy, deeply paneled, floor to ceiling dark oak. And I think you mentioned this at one point. It's very old English, it's formal. It's heavy. It's dark. There's a lot of gravitas, right? It's
Yes,
built
yes.
into this home. And you lit up the ceiling by painting it this light, I would say kind of robin's egg blue, maybe a little bit lighter, lacquer. The whole ceiling is lacquered. It's bright and shiny. How on
Yeah.
earth did you come up with that idea? I mean, I know ceilings, the fifth wall, a lot of designers like to do stuff on the ceilings, but wow, talk about an unexpected move. First of all, how did you come up with it? But second of all, what do you think it does for that space?
Okay. So I would say that was definitely a collaborative idea between the client and myself, like right out of the gate. They already knew that they liked lacquered surfaces.
Okay.
So there was a discussion. She did not like the paneling. What can we do to change it without rip it out? But to make it lighter or brighter or just not feel like an old English house. And of course,
because her husband did respect it. Like he was probably like, "You're not touching it. This is old. It has history. We're not messing with it." Right. So you had two of them.
Exactly that. This was the first. This was the first like design challenge. How are we going to broker this political
this
divide?
Marriage dispute?
Yes. And so there was a lot of talk around what could we do? Everybody loved blue. We can all agree on that. Let's go for blue. So, and then there was, romantic discussions about different ways to romanticize blue. Is it the Tiffany blue? Is it a Wedgwood blue? Is it a Dutch boy blue? I think we kind of ended up on a Wedgwood blue. So the big discussion initially was, should we do something to the walls? I was in the camp of, hey, let's, we don't have to rip the wood out. That would be sacrilege, but let's paint the entire room in the same lacquer blue. And the wife was on board with that. She really wanted that. And we actually got the husband on board for about, let's say a week.
Okay.
We did one wall, and he just legitimately was like, I just can't. He's like, I can't.
Wait a minute. You actually did a wall? You all the way to the lacquer?
Yeah, we did. We did start prepping all the wood, and he pulled the plug on it. And that's beyond fine because, everything happens as it should, as long as you believe that and give it space to develop. So in the end, we said, okay, let's just put resources into really like resurrecting the beauty of the wood, the luster of the wood, doing repairs to the wood, etc. But let's make sure we keep this on the ceilings. Like the fact that it's reflective, felt that it would bring in a certain dynamic to the room that is really missing in a dark wood English room. This one room is, more of a darker room. And so putting a highly reflective finish on the ceiling in any color, but especially one that everybody was excited about, the blue, even if it wasn't on the wall, still created a much more kind of playful, glamorous, modern detail that reflected light while still leaving the wood paneling. So you've got two worlds. I don't want to say colliding because that has a different impression, but two worlds coming together. So again, the more glam forward notion of the lacquer, that very like nail polish or car paint lacquer,
right?
Juxtapose the wood paneling. And then once that was established, it's like, okay, all we really need to do is just like pick a few more details and have fun with the blue and the more modern take on how blue can be presented. And that's where we did like the ombre shades and a few other elements, but then we're not afraid to harken back to what the house is and that room is, which again is more Gothic revival, Old English. And so we brought that into some of the furniture, but in more playful ways. So the center table has a very heavy scrolled leg. The chair that's kind of in the little library.
The tufted,
is exactly what it looks like. I don't know what even style you would attribute to that, but the fabric on it, which was actually a very beautiful bespoke traditional fabric, but
Hmm.
it's sort of like a fun preppy version of it in the houndstooth. So,
Right.
we just kind of brought some of the elements together, certain traditional elements prevailing, other more modern elements prevailing, and let them kind of play together, and just really reinforcing the blue. Like that was we were religious to not bring in any other color in that space.
Well, I guess to me, it's this. I can see it if the entire room was lacquered blue. I mean, that would look fresh and unexpected, and it would be fun. It would be very, very fun. And it would definitely say we are putting our stamp on this. We are completely rethinking what a more traditional Old English foyer would be. But I feel like by just doing the ceiling, you're really saying we really respect the history and what's going on here. But this is who we are this is who we are living in this house. And that
Yes.
ceiling does all of that. Of course, it makes it happy and everything, but it also tells you so much about what you're going to experience as you walk through the rest of the house.
Yeah, I think it was that's well put, because by doing that, we could have painted the ceiling blue. That's one thing, but the high
The
gloss
lacquer.
lacquer,
Yeah.
it's the lacquer that really is a calling card. That's a preview to what is to come.
Now, keeping with this house for a second, and we're just really curious as to your take on this. This house in particular, I mean, all of them, but this house in particular really is appointed so beautifully, so tastefully. I mean, it kind of just oozes good taste, which is sort of the New Englanders' way of saying money. And,
Yeah,
but what about the rest of us mere mortals? Like, can we ever have a house this beautiful without these kinds of appointments?
I think you absolutely can have a version of it. 100%. Pick things that don't have a lack of respect for or are not in consideration of the actual architecture of the space. So if it's a plain white box of an apartment, whatever that means, like, go with it, lean into it, don't ignore it. Now, I did say
Okay.
earlier on that good art design can hide bad architecture.
Right.
That's true, but it's not about obliterating the architecture. It's just fixing bad details, right?
Okay.
So a drapery at a window that goes floor to ceiling and wall to wall can hide a bad paint job that you can't change, or it can make the window just look twice as large. So that's more what I mean.
Right.
So can mere mortals, I consider myself a mere mortal because my house, I think, for me equally is beautiful, but it's my taste, and it's frankly done on a different type of budget. You'd be surprised, just so much good design. We're really blessed now. We collectively, there's such an emphasis on design that there's, with research especially, there's so much out there online or in stores or vintage, different versions of vintage. There's Etsy. I mean, I'm such an equal opportunity shopper.
Yeah.
You just have to be bold in your viewpoint, look for things that really are special and appeal to you and hopefully aren't routinely or commonly seen. Just stick to sources that, you can afford, and don't settle. Like, you can settle for simple things. You don't need everything to be fabulous. Sometimes a very simple, plain piece, and I mean this sincerely, like from IKEA, can absolutely 100% deliver as much as a very expensive piece, as long as I'm mixing everything. As long as I don't want my house to be from IKEA or from West Elm or from one store ever. There's no creativity in that for me or for my clients. But I'm not shy to use very low end price point items if it fills the bill and lets my dollar stretch further. And that's how I think the average Joe should approach it.
Well, it sounds to me like you're talking about educating yourself, like the value of knowing a style, its evolution, how it's come to be, and then the styles that came after it that referenced it, and also just getting to know craftsmanship, and so that when you are running into a sofa at a vintage store, that's you actually know what to look for and whether or not it is well made, or what style it is, and I mean, education takes time, and it takes a level of interest for just, regular people if they want to know. But I mean, people who listen to this show, we're all passionate about design, so that we want to be educated, and I do think
Yeah,
that goes a long way to helping you make good choices when you've got a limited budget. And as you said, it's relative. Everyone has a limited budget. It's just how many zeros are behind the number.
exactly. You're right.
Before we continue with the conversation, I want to jump in here for a minute and introduce you to my slow style approach to creating a home you love. Just like it sounds, slow style means taking your time and letting your home evolve by responding to what's going on in the rest of your life and reflecting who you are and who you want to become. Now, I know that sounds really abstract, but I don't want you to think that slow style means you're just waiting around for inspiration to strike. I know you need practical, hands-on ways to actually develop your signature style. And that's what I'm passionate about, taking the mystery out of creative thinking when it comes to design and helping you define what your dream home actually looks like. And the best way to start is to get really clear on what your style is. Now, I'm not talking about style categories like I'm farmhouse or I'm boho. I'm talking about a one-of-a-kind definition that is very specific to who you are. And we've got a blueprint that will help you do just that. It's our free style guide. I'll walk you through some questions and get you thinking about how you want to show up in your home. Just go to littleyellowcouch.com and click on the free style guide button right there on the homepage. I can't wait to see what you come up with. And I'm going to ask you, so don't be surprised when we start having a back and forth conversation about your home. I'm all in, and I hope you are too. All right, let's get back to the episode. All right, so the last 3 photos that I wanted to talk with you about are all from the same home. And it's like one room after another. It's just more and more stunning. And what I kind of wanted to pull out was the flow between one room and the next. I mean, you can look at each room individually, and we can, and we will, and we should talk about some stunning details. But also, I don't want to forget that I want to talk about that kind of story arc between all 3 rooms. So let me just very quickly say it's the one from Montclair, New Jersey. I believe the rooms are adjacent to one another, and it looks to be a living room, a dining room, and I guess I would call it a sun porch. Mm-hmm. So describe them for us, and then tell us sort of your own kind of storyline that you had running through these 3 very distinct rooms.
This is actually my own home.
Oh, really? So, I did not know that. Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's my own home. So so you're going to get the real inside scoop.
Oh, good. Great.
Right. So, boy.
Well, clearly I love it. So.
Well, thank you very much. So just to orient you, I think it's important. As you look at the living room, you're looking out to the front of the house. That big picture window looks to the front of the house. If you were to do a 180, you'd be looking at the dining room. If we look at the dining room to the right, there's an opening. And then as you look through the window to the left in the dining room, you are looking at an interior window between the dining room and the sunroom.
Yeah.
So visually, there is a connection between all 3.
Okay.
That's important. And in fact, then when you look out the back all the way through to the living room, you can see from the living room to the front yard because of the way those rooms are set up. The living room sofa, the club chairs, the little slipper chairs with the silver chrome leg that are in front of the piano, a very funky, tall lamp, the ottoman in the living room.
Yeah.
I'm just naming a few things. That's about it. Those are the pieces that I brought from our old home, which I had. They were all custom made, good pieces, and I liked them as they were. So I didn't want to change them. But the exception, was this two slipper chairs I reupholstered.
Okay.
So I had a couple reference points to start, which was the deep cobalt blue and the black and white ottoman, and the yellow pillows. And I was not tired of them at all. So I did have a starting point with those, and the color scheme really evolved around some of those immediate pieces that I had, and I just re-emphasized it with the really deep cobalt window shears, and then the vintage yellow, kind of golden yellow club chair. So I had that already. So kind of re-emphasize that with the black and white on the speckling on the rug, the big rug. So those elements were kind of how I designed the living room. That was sort of the genesis, at least the color scheme and the sort of the mid-century
Yeah.
swanky feeling, which I always personally love. That just makes me feel happy. It's like that's just like I want to put on music that I want
You
to
want
pour
to have
you
a
a drink in
cocktail.
a
Yeah.
cocktail in the martini glass. I just love that.
Right.
That's a fun era that I relate to. And then the dining room was sort of an extension of some of those colors, but I did have another starting place, which was the iconic piece of artwork over the dining table. That's a painting of a movie still with Steve McQueen and Jack Lewis. And I've had that painting for years. And so, it already had some of the elements of colors and things that I wanted, but I wanted to be playful again. So the wallpaper, which is a complete departure, is actually an old English print, but it has just kind of has all the same colors again, but they're reinterpreted in a very different way. And so it's about that. It's like picking certain elements, colors, and motifs, and either spinning one off the other. So the colors might be the same, but the motif changes to something unexpected. And then that's sort of like what happens with the sunroom. I think I picked the least represented color in the dining room and the living room, which was a lighter turquoise, and that became primarily the signature color of that room, with all that wood paneling, which was existing, which we just darkened. So it's kind of like finding these elements and imagine they're balls, you're tossing them in the air, a metaphor that makes sense. And that's how I think you get something that has flow, but distinction. I'm not a fan of any home, no matter how beautiful the rooms are, where I go through the rooms and I can't really remember shortly thereafter a good distinguishing, what distinguished them.
Yeah.
I think flow makes people feel good when there's flow in lots of aspects of our life, not the least of design.
Yeah.
People feel good. People feel good as they experience it. I don't feel great if things become too static or too repetitive.
Yeah. I think what's so delightful about these three rooms is that the color, without you realizing it at first, or at least without, if an untrained eye may not be able to say, oh, it's the color that is kind of tying the rooms together. There's a color story there, but you feel that in your bones, but the rooms themselves are so distinctive. And I guess it's because there are objects or features of each of these rooms that are in and of themselves kind of showstoppers in a way. And I think that you've highlighted each of them so beautifully. I mean, the dining room, the coffered ceiling is awesome, but you really didn't highlight that much. It's really more that wall where the wallpaper is. And I'm just now noticing as I'm looking at it that actually, so it's an accent wall. But then one wall to the right of it is like a white-ish, or like in the white family. And then the other wall to the left of it is this kind of dark, moody blue, I assume. Nobody does that. Nobody has one accent wall and then one, adjacent wall is one color and the other adjacent wall is a different color. Nobody does that. And you don't even notice it. Like it just kind of fades away because it's tying these two rooms together. So it doesn't feel like this weird choice. It just feels like it's helping with the whole flow from living to dining to sunroom.
That you said something earlier, which I thought was great, because it is exactly what I want to infuse my designs with, which is less that everything that is great. Look at me, I'm great. More that there is subtlety that is important that people may not pick out. Nor do I want them to pick them out. They might if it's of interest, like you are interested in your analyzing, and but I don't want people to sit in my room and just necessarily be distracted by trying to figure, well, what do they do here? I just care about what the experience or the feeling is.
Right.
So yes, you'll pay attention to the bold, fun stuff, because I think there are moments where you want things to be bold and take center stage and hold the room and feel like, feel iconic, such as that painting or such as that, even the backdrop wallpaper, the accent wall.
Yeah.
And there's other elements that you want to just kind of respectfully and confidently kind of retire and be there and play an essential role, but not stand up and say, look at me. Right. The dining room to me also
the balance. The
balance. Like the dining room is like usually the place where you have like fun dinners and, it's like sitting around it. So like, why not have something that's a little bolder and because the dining room is a destination. Like
Exactly. Oh, yes.
there's an event there, right? So it can handle to have something maybe a little stronger and iconic.
Mm.
Whereas like a sunroom, like at the end of the day, the sunroom is a sunroom because it's almost all glass and you're looking outside, so it doesn't need as much.
Yeah, it's the sum of all of the parts, I guess. I feel like, and I guess that's why I wanted to talk to you about all three of these rooms at once, is that they build on each other. There's this narrative that's going through, so that each new room that I opened, and of course I'm looking at it on a computer. So each photo I
Mhm.
opened, it was like, oh, wow. It just kept building. And I guess that's getting back to what you've said so much today, is about what people are experiencing. Like, what are they literally feeling as they walk into a room? And one last thing I want to say before I wrap this up with my final question. It's not really a question. It's just a comment, which is that one of the things I absolutely love about your work is that I am not done looking at the space when I do my first scan. Um, I can't possibly take it all in one scan. So in other words, there are these little details that I keep discovering. And I think that to me is the hallmark of really fabulous design, is when you're not done just by looking at it in one kind of fell swoop.
That's well, that's wonderful. Thank you very, very much. It's quite a compliment, and I hope that's the case. I think there's depth. I want there to be depth because we are deep people,
Mhm.
and we are complicated people. That's great. I'm glad that that's how you see my work. I really appreciate that.
Well, that it does lead me into my final question, because you kind of just hinted on it about what style can do for us. Why does style matter?
God, there's so many ways I could answer this. So
Yeah.
I'll try to sound smart. And I feel like it just is it matters because it gives you the opportunity to take the mundane and make it so much better. I think
Mm,
style starts with something that what an individual can bring to a common experience. We all have to
mm,
wear clothes. We all have to wear clothes. We all have to, when we're tired, we have to sit down.
mhm,
When we're, when we all more or less need to have four walls and a roof over us. But
mhm,
those occupy such big parts of our life in terms of time and experience that style matters, and style gives us the opportunity to take those events and make them much better and more shareable. I know this, like when you dress stylishly, whatever that may be,
yeah.
you're doing it for two reasons and for two audiences. You're doing it for yourself, and you're definitely doing it for somebody to look at you and to
Mhm.
have an exchange of energy. And I always look at some people, and I'm very, very, very observant, and I try not to judge, but sometimes you see something like, what the hell are they wearing? But then the other part, but the other thing that comes into my head is like, but they tried. They actually
Yeah.
thought of like more than just stepping out of bed and showing up as though none of it matters. They
Right.
tried. So like that actually like puts a smile on my face. They
You're
actually said,
right.
okay, like I want to give a call. I want to say something about myself and to the world about whatever. And
Right.
so I think that's where style is for me. And it's limitless. It's limitless.
Mm,
It's not a box to be checked. It's a way to express mood and
mm.
again, to have an interaction with people and just to take something basic that could remain basic, if not elevated to something much bigger and more exciting. And that
Mm.
is exciting to me.
I thought that was beautifully said, and I feel like your designs evoke this feeling of pleasure seeking in my mind. There's so
I
much pleasure that I imagine having, and these rooms are set up, right, for